global conflict?
People used to think that there is a war between the Palestinians and the Israelis. It is true on the technical way, but it is a part of a much larger scenario, global scenario. And more people understand today that Israel is just a Western outpost in the clash of civilizations, in religious war between the Muslims and the rest of the world. It's not only the Jews or the Christians. Samuel Huntington, in his book Clash of Civilizations, counted maybe 170, 180 global events at the time the book was written, and 95% of them were between Muslims and non-Muslims globally. So we have a war between us and the Palestinians, but it's part of a much wider disease. It's just the local symptoms in the Middle East that we suffer from.
You used a medical metaphor. How would you describe what's the nature of the disease that's behind the jihad, and how that affects the Western world?
I'm trying to avoid the cliches of cancer that is trying to take over the body, because it were used so many times. I'd rather describe it as a conflict of two philosophies, two religions, two cultures that are trying to eliminate. Let me say it again. I would rather describe it as a culture, the Muslim culture, trying to take over everything that is within their frontiers. And once they do it, they push forward their frontier. It's a global new imperialism, like the old one that we saw in the 19th century, only this time it was a different shape, a different sort, but it's still a global imperialism.
What first-hand personal experience have you had with the terror movements on a personal level in dealing with Palestinian terror and those who oppose the
I'm I'm a plastic surgeon by training, and my specialty in plastic surgery is the treatment of burns. And for many years, I was in charge of the burn unit, and during my years in the Israeli Defense Forces Medical Corps, I was in charge of treatment of terror victims, among other war injuries. And I was the head of plastic surgery in Hadassah, in Kerem, Jerusalem University Hospitals during the year of the Second Intifada, mainly in its peak between the year 2000 and 2003. And I had to treat about 3,000 terror victims that arrived in our hospital from the streets of Jerusalem, from buses, from coffee shops, but also from anywhere else in the country, because there were times that casualties were evacuated from the scene and sent to all the hospitals in Israel because it was overcrowded in the hospital nearby. And from time to time I had the opportunity to treat the terrorists themselves. Sometimes there were unlucky suicide bombers that weren't killed, either because they were hit and injured before they were able to to blow themselves, or that something was fault with the explosives, and it only partially took, and they weren't killed. And it is an abnormal scenario to treat the terrorist and its victims side by side in the same room, in the emergency room or in the department. It's mainly difficult for the victims to see that the one who tried to kill them is lying just next to them and getting treated. And for some families, it was really impossible. They hate it. But doctors behave in such situation in abnormal way. I mean, the normal instinct would be to kill this terrorist, and I guess that if I would see him in the street walking with his backpack or belt, and I would know that he's the terrorist, I would take my gun and kill him. Once he is a patient of mine, I would treat him. I would fight to save his life. That's abnormality, but it's not the only abnormality of our life in Israel. It's an extreme situation, and sometimes extreme situations call for abnormal behavior. This is only one of the examples of such an abnormal behavior. And there was not only this abnormal behavior of the medical teams that treated those who came and wanted to kill them and their families. It wasn't accepted as a normal behavior by the terrorists themselves. There was one about 40 years old accountant from Lebanon, not one of these prototype of young, miserable, nothing to lose fanatics. He has family, has a job, and he came from Lebanon with false certificate and a suitcase loaded with explosives. And one day he reached under the bed in his hotel room in Jerusalem to take out the suitcase, and it exploded. He lost both legs, both eyes, one arm, and he had 60% burns on whatever left of him. That's how he came under my treatment. And I was in burns. It happens many times that you have to work one-on-one for a long time. He was hospitalized for 3 or 4 months. And he never could understand why we treat him.
Why you helped him?
Yes, why we are trying so hard to save his life. In his case, it was not only the obvious medical reaction, part of our obligation to every patient, but a kind of special punishment. To stay in, I really believe that to stay in such a miserable existence sometimes is worse than dying on the spot. But he was doomed to stay like this for the rest of his life because what he was doing. Blind, no legs, no hand, left as in a box to debate with himself for the rest of his life what he was doing and what was the punishment of what he was doing. Philosophically, it's a kind of a punishment for somebody like that. I mean, I would think that if God forbid I would be in such a situation, I'd rather die than stay in such a situation.
But surely, have you treated Israeli civilian victims of terror who have had to suffer similar, or if not worse, punishment?
Yes, but I don't remember any one of them who was all so mutilated as this guy, because he carried the explosive on him. But there were patients of mine that, even though I tried to save their life with everything that I knew, we lost them. Not few didn't survive the terrible injuries that these people inflicted upon them. And we had big burns and small burns, and people were amputated. Some of them survived, some not, but he was the one, I don't know how, survived the worst injuries. Some of them didn't. And I don't remember having such a dilemma whether to keep somebody alive or not. In other cases, people usually wants to live very much, and if they are not so badly mutilated, they can do it.
How is it possible for Israel to make peace, or to establish peace, with such a perhaps brainwashed neighbor, both alongside in adjacent neighborhoods and among Islamists who are Israeli Arab citizens?
Historically, I think it's not the first time that hatred is a strong motivation in wars. Germans hated the France, and the Japanese hated the American, and vice versa. And eventually it disappeared. It can happen, but we'll have to change education in the refugee camps. We have to change incitement in the mosques. Japanese were educated to hate the Americans as long as they fought them, and as long that the regime that started the war was in power. The way to change it was to put down German Nazi or the regime in Japan. We'll have to put down the regime that organized this incitement, that teach this hatred. And eventually people, most all of the people, wants to live their quiet life without fighting, without killing. So I think our task in history is to get rid of these radical Muslim teachers and imams and leaders that send the children to be killed in our buses, in our streets. Once we do that, and it will take military force to do that, it won't happen by words, by talks. It will happen if we'll implement brutal force in the right places, in the right timings, and eventually we will be able to change the leadership of our enemy, and then the people will do as normal people everywhere in the world. They try to do their everyday living. They'll try to survive. They'll try to prosper. They'll try to enjoy life, not to sanctify death, but to enjoy life.
As a humanitarian for many years, working as a humanitarian then, is your position, are you coming from a position of humanitarianism both for the Palestinians and for the Israelis on a human level?
I'm not raising the flag of humanitarian. I am a Jewish citizen of Israel who wants my nation to survive, who want my culture to prosper. Unfortunately, to do that, I have to fight. But I'm a human being and I'm a physician and I respect life and I will fight for other people's life, my friends as my enemies. I will not raise the flag of global humanitarian efforts because this is not the flag that I raise on an everyday basis. I'm not fighting for these, but I take it as part of my nature. When I fight my enemies, I'm still a human being. When I fight my enemies in the battlefield, in politics, in the Middle East, or against the global terrorism, I will use all the humanitarian tools that I have because I'm convinced that they are so much better than any other tools. I am convinced that the way to solve the conflict in the Middle East will be by a large-scale resettlement of refugees. The Palestinian refugees are the only population of refugees that exist in their poor statehood for the last 60 years. All other refugees in the world were resettled in their new places. The world kept the Palestinian refugees in appalling condition for 60 years, paying maybe $100 billion to keep them in refugee camps, to let the imams teach them hatred and incitement, gave them medications, gave them food, gave them education, only to keep them there. Half this amount of money would be enough to give them normal life, to resettle them in Jordan or in Egypt or anywhere else in the world. But because the world took the Palestinian point that they want the refugees back in Israel, and until they are back in Israel, they are to be kept in their camps, the world is punished by this wave of global terrorism that was born in these refugee camps. The 9/11 was not started in the United States, but the people who did it were people who came from the Middle East, taught by this hatred, educated for hatred of anything that is not Muslim. Everything that is not Muslim is to be killed because it's unsacred. Once you solve the problem of the refugees, you have a good start of solving the local conflict. I'm not saying that we will be able to solve the problem of the global jihad, but you have, fighting the global jihad, you must reduce the local friction in any site that it is erupted. And in the Middle East, the local site, if you wish, the local inflammation that must be cured is the problem of the refugees. That's where I use my humanitarian values to solve a problem and for the long run reduce the friction and eventually get peace in the Middle East.
Are you suggesting that the Muslim peoples are victims themselves of tyrants and tyranny and dictators and religious exploitation?
Yes, it's very easy to see it. If you run a survey in Gaza Strip today, you'll find that most all of the people hates Israel and hates the Jews and hates the American, but also are longing for the time that Israel was in power and they could run normal life, even though they were, so quote, under occupation. Right now they have the independence. No Israelis are seen in the streets of Gaza, but they kill each other. And they have no hope, no future, no food. They spend all their efforts in fighting each other. I mean, in many times where you could talk to Palestinians privately, not on the media, they would curse Yasser Arafat, they would curse the Hamas, they would curse anybody who took over and decided for them how they are going to conduct their life, which means in an eternal war against Israel.
So what would the idea of Palestinian sovereignty and the idea of a Palestinian state, what kind of a state would that be, both towards its own citizens and then as a neighbor against Israel?
Any state that will be located west to the Jordan River is an irredenta that will try to take over Israel. All the leaders of Israel knew that an independent Palestinian state west to the Jordan River is an existential threat to a Jewish state in Israel. And it didn't change. The only thing that changed was that in some point in history, we had short-sighted leaders who believed that they can tame the terrorists and make them our friends. They didn't understand anything, not in Islam, not in history, nothing. The people who created the Oslo Agreement, Yitzhak Rabin, Shimon Peres, Yossi Beilin, do not understand anything in these issues. They thought that if they will bring the terrorists home, they will give them a state or a semi-state, they would become friends and would live side by side with us. I think most all of the Israelis nowadays waken up and saw that the paradigm of the two-state solution, Israel and Palestine, west to the Jordan River, living side by side, is no longer valid. When we withdraw from South Lebanon or from Gaza Strip and let them on their own, they weren't satisfied. I mean, it wasn't a territorial issue. Rabin and Peres and those who thought that the division of the land and giving a Palestinian independent state and Judea and Samaria and Gaza will solve the problem misdiagnosed the disease. The problem weren't the borders. The Palestinian Liberation Organization was started 3 years before the Six-Day War, before the so-called occupation. I know of only one occupation. The Arab occupation of the land of Israel started in the 8th century. That's the only occupation that I know. The people of Israel cannot be occupiers in their own homeland as much as the Italians cannot be occupiers in Italy. It's their land. Somebody else, a long history, took it over, and they drove them away in the 19th century. That's normal. That's a war of independence. But even if the Palestinians will give up their hope to take over Israel, they still are running a policy of expansion. We don't want to occupy you, said the moderate Palestinian. We just want to have the right of return of the Palestinian refugees. It's not the work. It's not the way it's going to work in Israel, because Israel will be eliminated as a Jewish state once we'll accept 2 million or 3 million refugees into the state of Israel. There's no way this is going to be accepted by the Israelis. So the Palestinians will have to give up their hope to come back to Tel Aviv and Haifa and Tzfat and Jerusalem. And once they give up this hope, we are on the way to solve the problem. But as long as they teach their kids that they are going to come back and everything is going to be theirs, there's no way we will be able to have two-state solution west to the Jordan River. There is a two-state solution, but that's on both sides of the Jordan River. Jordan is Palestine. 3/4 of the Jewish homeland were torn apart from our promised British mandate in 1922 and given to the Arabs as the Transjordan. And this is already the division of the land of Israel to two states. 75% of the citizens of Jordan are Palestinians. They are Palestine de facto and de jure. We don't need a third state. We have one Palestinian state, which is Jordan, one Jewish state, which is Israel. That's more than enough. A creation of a third state in the middle will be an irredenta both to Jordan and to Israel. That's a safe prescription for an eternal war.
How about Jordan then assuming responsibility and sovereignty over the West Bank?
Partially they're ready for it. They were the only Arab state that granted citizenship to the Palestinians. No other Arab state did it, and they are deeply involved in all areas of life, in politics, in everything in Jordan. And Jordan is not a democracy, and God bless them because they are not a pure democracy. If they were like what happens now in Iraq. The way that the Palestinians in Jordan were educated to become citizens in a state and not in a constant state of war with their neighbors were because they had a kingdom who supervised them, who integrate them into democratic life, but not the ultra-liberal democracy that we see elsewhere. They have a parliament, they vote for the parliament, they have their representative, but the king has more power than the parliament. And I think most all the Western world worship the kind of regime in Jordan because it really gives education and food and security for the citizens of Jordan. Once the Palestinians had an independence, or so-called independence, this is the Gaza Strip alternative. If not of the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan, eventually they would end up like the situation in Gaza or in Kosovo or in Darfur, where they keep killing each other in masses because there's no central group of force that will be able to control. I think Jordan can be the right prescription for the future Palestinian state when 1 million or 2 million refugees will be resettled in the empty spaces in Jordan where water can be tunneled and desalinized there, where huge energy power stations can be built, housing and jobs can be created. And I think in a course of 10 or 20 years, the solution of the Palestinian refugees can become a truth in Jordan.
Why wouldn't it be acceptable to Israel to have Jordan assume governance over the existing territories?
If anybody believes in safe borders, there aren't any safe borders within the west side of the Jordan River. If the Palestinians will be able to create their bases in less than 10 miles from Ben Gurion Airport, we will never have an independent Jewish state west to the Jordan River. We will eventually have to send our forces to take over again and have a military presence in Judea and Samaria. I believe that Judea and Samaria are the heartland of Israel, and if the Jewish people have a right to live in Tel Aviv, we have all the right in the world to live in Hebron and in Bethlehem and in Nablus and in Shiloh, where our first temple stood. This is our homeland. We have the right to live there and stay there. The only way to make it safe for both sides to exist in the land of Israel is when we have the security and the military responsibility of this area. I wouldn't trust for the long run any Arab state to have a power on my main homeland at the heartland of Israel. Jordan is doing fine, but in the Middle East these regimes are not very stable, and if a Hamas will take over the state of Jordan, I don't want to see a Hamas independent state 10 miles away from Tel Aviv.
On a political basis, you have been following the Iranian president very carefully over the last year, some of his statements. And Ahmadinejad claims the destruction of Israel is close, he said recently. Why aren't Israelis taking him seriously and establishing a more of a deterrent or even preemptive existential position?
Because we have bad leaders. Because we have the wrong leaders. And this was proven time and again in Lebanon, in Gaza, in internal affairs. They are not only corrupt, they're almost good for nothing. They cannot run the simplest decision and execute it. Not only political execution. Everyday life is not performed. And they took the wrong policy about Iran. They said it's not Israel's problem, it's the whole world problem. That's a mistake. Because once a problem is a whole world problem, it's nobody's problem. I believe that Israel should say very clearly to the whole world that Iran may cause huge damage to the whole world, but primarily it's our problem. And if the world will not solve the problem within a given timetable, Israel will have to solve the problem, and if we will not have enough conventional power to do it, we will do it with whatever power we have, because we will never allow ourselves to face another Holocaust.
Do you think Iran is just boasting when they threaten that the Zionist regime's future is dim, or do you think that they would attack Israel for an existential war?
They will attack Israel as soon as they feel that they can eliminate Israel in one blow.
And to the extent that the U.S. is now, as you predicted when we spoke last year, the U.S. is negotiating an exit strategy with Iran's capability, with perhaps a tacit acceptance of their nuclear energy program.
One can differentiate it very easily between a peaceful nuclear energy and a nuclear industry to create weapons. In order to do that, Iran will have to accept on the ground supervisor 24 hours a day and open policy for all its sites. Right now there are sites that never were visited by any supervisor from the international community, and that's why not many people in the world doubt the fact that they are producing nuclear bomb and not doing anything with nuclear energy for peaceful purposes. Iran, like any other state, will or should be allowed to have a nuclear power station for electricity. But it's a joke to think that they want to do it. Iran is the largest producer, or one of the largest producers of oil in the world. They do not need nuclear power station for electricity. They need it to create fuel for the nuclear bombs.
Well, how would you like to influence the Israeli political and government system today in order to handle these daily growing threats?
I left my position at the hospital with only one mission: to prevent the creation of a Palestinian state. In order to do that, I have to be part of the government. But I will not be ready to be part of the government when, or within the framework of this current government, which is corrupt, failing, and take all the wrong decisions. We'll have to change the government of Israel, and then I want to be part of the new government.
Are you a current member of the present government?
No, I'm a proud current member of the Israeli opposition to the government. It's not a great pride to be part of this government. I'd rather stay in the opposition until we change the government.
What's this new party that you're developing?
There's the political map in Israel is very complicated, especially for Americans that are used to two-party set of the politics. The national camp in Israel, or the right-wing camp, is divided to several sub-divisions, some of them religious, some of them non-religious, some of them more to the center, some of them are characterized by involvement of newcomers from Russia, basically. Looking at the political map in Israel, we need a non-religious party